we're talking about the Countryside Stewardship WD2 higher tier options, but with particular reference to the woodland supplements WS1 and WS3, which are deer and squirrel related. Before we go right through, I'd like to introduce the deer and squirrel team. I'd like to start with the sort of national representatives. Rebecca Eisted, would you like to say hello?
Hello.
And we've got David Jam, who's our National Deer Officer.
I don't.
Alistair Boston, North West and West Midlands Deer Officer, based in that area team.
Good afternoon, everybody. I will also be taking the questions in the chat box. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, can you please put them in the chat box, and then I will read them out to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alistair. The Ahmed Siddiqui we've got is the North East and Yorkshire Deer Officer.
Afternoon, all.
And from the South East and London team, Jamie Caudry, who a number of you will probably know already. And Mark Malins isn't present today, but he covers the South West area.
Hi everyone. I'll be trying to answer questions in the chat as we go. If I can't keep up, Armin will help out. If we've got any outstanding questions left at the end that are not answered to your satisfaction, then Alistair's going to take charge of that in the Q&A session.
Lovely. Thank you, everyone. What we'll do now is proceed. I'm David Hooton. I'm the Deer Officer covering East and East Midlands. So we're going to quickly talk about the squirrel and deer supplements today. It's obviously a very new part of the WD2 Countryside Stewardship supplements, the scheme. We'll talk a bit about this, how we've got to where we are with the deer and squirrels. We'll talk about the supplement itself and why we've got one. A little bit about the capital infrastructure related to deer and squirrels with the WD2 element, and then how the supplements work. We can then move into the question and answer session. I thought it'd be useful just to really set the scene about how we've got to where we've got to, really. As most of you will know, we've got two native deer species in the country, the red deer and roe deer. And around about 100 years ago, we started to see the introduction of other species to the landscape. And it's really quite important to recognise and realise and remember that 100 years ago, there were very few wild deer in the country. So what we're seeing today, the sort of increase in numbers and spread, is a result of activities, deer breeding, recruitment, our human activities in terms of habitat creation and the sort of landscape movement and population management that has been occurring for many decades now. Through that time, of course, we've seen the spread of deer across large areas. But just remember that one of the first wildlife rangers and game wardens would have been sort of in the early 1950s, and then the Deer Act in 1963, which obviously had a great bearing on how we could control deer across our landscape areas and sort of brought welfare to the front of the deer management that was being undertaken. Land ownerships and how we manage our countryside has changed a lot. We've got a lot of winter cereal feeding crops now, which provide feeding for deer throughout the year, and over the last couple of decades we've seen an increase in the number of woodlands being planted, and obviously there's a great drive at the moment to increase that woodland hectareages over the next 50 years, and deer no doubt will continue to live happily in a lot of these areas, using the wider landscape to feed in as well as the woodland areas. So having said that, we've sort of seen this increase in deer population and more species in the countryside, why have we been able to see such a widespread increase? And a lot of it's to do with how we manage the countryside, the landscape, and how we have managed the deer, and some of the sort of interests that we've had in increasing numbers across certain areas. In many respects, it's a success story. We've seen populations of all 6 species in the countryside increase in their natural range and numbers. Moving into wooded areas, landscape areas, habitat management has obviously improved a lot of the density holding for the deer species we've got. Woodland planting obviously helped, winter cereals has helped, an increase in the volunteer support stalkers, accompanied stalking, often encourages a target-rich environment, which has its part to play, but also we need to be focusing very much on the landscape management and what we want to see from the countryside. What are the important features and how do deer fit with that? We've got obviously a lot of movement of deer across the areas, and their sort of management is critical to a lot of our future management of landscape management objectives. These are some distribution maps from the British Deer Society, starting from the early 1970s through to today, and you can see the sort of the wide range of species we've got now. Just for context, in the 1970s, the estimated deer population was around about 500,000, and that moved up to 1 million or so in the 1990s, and we're talking about 2 million or so now. And that increase has been alongside proactive management of deer and also the sort of the landscape that we're operating in. British Deer Society are estimating that there's probably in the region of 350,000 deer a year culled. If we've got a population of 2 million or so, we're probably underculling and below recruitment in a lot of areas. There are areas of the countryside where deer are actively managed and the populations and the habitats are more in line, but a lot of the areas we're still seeing this increase in impact and range expansion. One of the things that we've undertaken over the last 2 years is a risk map. This is data from a number of sources, but those involved in the forestry sector have been involved heavily with this. Looking at where deer are present, it is not an impact map, it is a risk map. In many respects, everywhere could be at risk, and it's to do with how and what we want from our landscapes as to what that risk may be. And to understand fully the risk that you may be under locally, you do need to be thinking about undertaking a site-based risk assessment based on what your landscape objectives are and the deer populations present. We need to be very clear about what our management objectives are and how deer will either conflict or benefit those landscape management objectives. We probably all recognise some of the sort of pictures within this slide. We've got areas of coppice that are being eaten. We're seeing understory depleted in many areas across the countryside, and then more and more fencing being put up to protect our woodland landscape. And that'll be the same whether it's a new woodland planting or whether it's woodlands back into management. There is significant risk from deer and squirrels. And really, it's not sustainable to continue fencing against deer across wide landscape areas. So we need to sort of think very clearly about how we manage our landscapes and increase our woodland cover. We can't just fence and we can't just tube. It has to be a combination of both. And the default position at the moment seems very much about we'll put a fence around it, we'll put some tubes on it, and we'll sort of worry about the deer population later. That doesn't protect that wider landscape, and it certainly doesn't protect the natural biodiversity of the areas outside those fence lines. And in reality, it's putting more pressure on that wider landscape. In terms of squirrels, we've all seen squirrels in all of our woodlands. Again, remember back in the 1940s, there were very few grey squirrels just in that sort of central and south England area. Red squirrels were prevalent throughout the country, or the remaining part of that country. And over the sort of the following 70, 80 years, we've seen that red squirrel population pushing back up to the realms of Scotland. So very few in England now. Squirrel UK think there's about 2.7 million squirrels in the countryside. Their population and number is causing quite severe impacts in many areas. And it's these impacts that we're all very much interested in trying to prevent and reduce. If we're looking at new woodlands, if you're looking at the woodlands already in management where we've got restocking taking place, pictures of what we're seeing here, bark stripping, trees with tops falling out due to the bark stripping activity, and the sort of reduction in timber quality is prevalent. I think it's fair to say that in some parts of the country, we don't see quite as much squirrel activity in others, but everywhere is at risk, and that sort of age class of 10 to 40 years old is significant. As we go forward over the next 50 years of planting new trees and new hedgerows and new woodlands, we do need to be thinking very seriously about the threat of which they are under. It really is a sort of a critical phase we're going through. Bringing old woodlands back into management has been ongoing for the last 30 years, but so often we forget about the pressures they're under from other species and, of course, tree disease. To that end, we've sort of been looking at what are the threats, and we've very much come to realise that that's not popping up. That we need to support landowners and deer stalkers and managers in how we manage deer and squirrels across landscape areas. We needed a bit of a change really in the emphasis of deer control and squirrel management if we're going to be protecting those things that we're trying to achieve, like the Woodlands Back into Management Programme and trees and new woodland creation. Historically, we've had an underculling of the female deer population. Wouldn't necessarily say we've had an overcull of the male deer, but most of the deer populations we see are always male dominated. So we need to change that emphasis to winter culling 1st of November through to 31st of March on the female control side of it. In many areas, there's been a limited emphasis on squirrel control, and our current culls are certainly not keeping track with that increasing population. I guess the other aspect of what we're trying to achieve is to protect the other public investment that's going on. If we're investing heavily in woodland improvement through WD2, we need to be making sure that the risks associated with that work are mitigated against. Deer and squirrels are some of the main contributing factors that we do have some control over, and we really should be doing it to the best of our abilities, supporting and using local deer stalkers and investing in their time and effort. A number of people will be talking about the venison price, no doubt, in the chat and sort of in and outside this meeting. The venison price fluctuates wildly. We do need an increasing home use of wild venison. I chair the England Wild Venison Working Group, working with our partners across the sector to try and work out where we can bring improved standards and increase that sale of local venison and increase our market space. There's a lot of pressure on meat at the moment. We are also importing venison from New Zealand and bits of Europe, but it's a matter of making sure that our homegrown market is as robust as it possibly can be. And this is sort of partly to do with ensuring standards and also making sure that the public aspect of wild deer management is not lost and that we're doing it for the right reasons. Through the incentive schemes, we are increasing the money available for deer and squirrel control. It's an incentive aimed at time on the ground. It's an incentive that we hope will be passed on to deer stalkers themselves to try and increase the amount of time they spend controlling deer adequately across our landscape areas. We've got an increase in deer officer support. There's one of us in each area team now to support our own in-house Forestry Commission staff, but also work very closely with the private sector to support you out there doing the work on the ground and to help you bring things forward that will enable you to do wider levels of control in the future. And really, there's also this increased landowner agent deer stalker engagement that we need for both deer and squirrel control, understanding what it is we're trying to do, understanding how increasing culls will hopefully improve habitat conditions and enable you to meet your landscape management objectives. It's important to remember that deer populations move widely across the country, and we are certainly looking at how collaborative management will improve the control happening at a site-specific level. Controlling Roman jack Chinese water deer in theory at a site-specific level should be relatively straightforward, providing time infrastructure is put in on the ground. Controlling the roaming populations of red deer, sika, and fallow deer will obviously be much more challenging, and this is where the joined-up approach is very much more required. We're working very closely with some of our facilitation cluster groups and trying to support them in getting wider landscape management through those groups. And we also encourage sort of that local engagement between the deer stalkers and landowners to increase that effectiveness over time. So there are the supplements within WD2, the woodland improvement aspect of countryside stewardship. The ones we're focusing on, the WS1 deer and WS3 grey squirrels. Deer management will be paid at £90 a hectare, and the grey squirrel control at £50 a hectare over the eligible land area. The other two supplements are to do with pause restoration and the public access. So we're now entering our second year of countryside stewardship WS1 and WS3 supplements. Last year in WD2, in woodland improvement, 327 cases were being taken forward, around about 34,000 hectares. Interestingly, out of those 327 cases, around about half, 152 cases, had deer aspects within it. This slightly surprised me, being based in the East. I mean, pretty much every woodland you go to in many parts of the country are affected by deer. And I was expecting a slightly higher uptake. And I just wonder why there were schemes that didn't have deer within them. It might be that they came into areas of lower risk. Was there a perception that the scheme was too onerous? Was there a lack of awareness of the supplement itself? Or were people already feeling control of the deer situation, so decided that they didn't need the extra money and support that was being required? Hopefully there weren't too many missed opportunities. One of the things going forward this year will be ensuring that as many people have the opportunity to at least discuss coming into the supplements and bring that rate of deer management across the sector and across the schemes to a high level. In terms of squirrel control, 130 out of those 327 schemes had deer control, squirrel control within them. And certainly from the east of England perspective, I think that was probably about apparent, really. There's not always high levels of risk to some of our woodlands here. In terms of these two supplements, what is it we're trying to achieve? And really, it's allowing the woodland management plan to function and to be delivered sustainably across the woodland areas. Landowners and forestry agents will understand what the woodland management plans have within them, and by controlling deer squirrel populations, hopefully we'll start to meet those targets more effectively. It's interesting if we look at the woodland creation aspects and the significant volumes of money being put into fencing and tree tubing. Financially, it's probably a lot more money going into protection rather than planting currently. We're trying to reduce the deer squirrel impact to woodland areas, trying to protect the ground flora and vulnerable features to the wider landscapes within those woodlands, and also the wider landscape in its entirety, the hedgerows outside these systems and some of the buffer strips. We're trying to improve the woodland structure and species diversity, helping to increase the resilience to climate change, pests and diseases. What's interesting is how much we are losing from our woodlands through deer browsing. And the supplement is there to support people in changing that loss into a positive feature, so we can actually get more from our woodland areas and our landscapes. The old capital items are still retained within WD2. FG9 is deer fencing. FG10 is a temporary deer fencing, so we can use Harris panels, we can use proper high-spec deer fencing depending upon the situation. FG11 is the exclosures, and FY1 high seats. So all those elements have been and will remain within WD2. New for this year, 2023 season, the application starting now, we've got FY3, which is squirrel control equipment. And this will include traps, tray poles and bait stations. When we're looking at the WS1 and WS3 supplements, we have to look at eligibility. And this starts within the woodland management plan. It's really important that within all our woodland management plans, we are identifying the risk that deer may have to the work being undertaken. So with the deer section 5.3 within the plan, we've got our species and likelihood of their presence. We've got the impact level. What is the current impact or the future impact threat to our features within that woodland? And then what response are you as an estate having to that impact and that activity and species presence? So where the deer are identified as a threat, that will then relate back into the WD2 application. And likewise with grey squirrels, 5.4 within the woodland management plan. Have you got squirrels present? And when we talk about the species there, we're talking about grey squirrels, but also if we have presence of red squirrels, we need to be taking them into account to ensure that they are protected. What is their current impact and what is the likely impact of those squirrels on what you're doing within the woodlands and also the current woodland structure? And likewise with the deer, what response are we having? What protection are you putting in place currently and what is required for the future? If these are identified at this stage within the woodland management plan, that makes you eligible potentially for WS1 and WS3, the supplements. What we need to remember is those supplements have to be applied for within the application process. Within WD2, the annex form that you're filling in, P2015 and P2016, the squirrel and deer columns need to be ticked. You need to be ensuring that you're undertaking deer control within the WD2 to ensure that you can become eligible again for WS1, WS3. It's not a particularly onerous task in terms of these two supplements. We are expecting draft deer squirrel plans to be submitted with the application to the RPA in that February to April period. So that's this time of year. We're looking at ensuring that we can support applicants at this moment with discussions about how we manage our deer, but the draft plan has to go to the RPA before it comes to us in May, June. Once it's been to the RPA and they've approved eligibility, the Countryside Stewardship Agreement, WD2, will then come back to the Forest Commission. We will be asked to be looking at the deer squirrel control plans alongside the woodland officers. And we have that opportunity to discuss with you as applicants the draft plans and ensure that they're fit for purpose and actually capture what it is you're trying to achieve on the ground. That will then go back to the RPA in late summer for the final agreement to be drawn up between you and the RPA to start on the 1st of January. So what actions are we expecting? Well, we expect, and as part of the agreement, you will be undertaking baseline deer squirrel assessments by the end of April in year 1, and then in years 3 and 5 in that spring emergence period. In conjunction and agreement with the woodland officers and ourselves, you will have applied for a number of exclosures and locations for those exclosures within the woodland. There will be some agreements that between the woodland officer and ourselves, we've decided that you do not need exclosures, but where these are committed to within the scheme, we'll expect those established by April of year 1 and monitored at years 1, 3 and 5. We've included the monitoring at year 1, so there's a record of what the starting point is. It's really important that we get that year 1 undertaken in that first pre-spring period, so we can really track the progress of what would happen without any deer pressure in those areas. We expect the agreed levels of deer culling to start in that first year. On the 1st of January coming through, we expect to see deer control at that ramped up level as agreed with the deer management plan. And then on an annual basis, we expect to see, or would like to see, a review of the deer and squirrel management plans to ensure that between the forestry agent, the owner and the stalker, you are actually starting to achieve what you have set out to do. In terms of the evidence reporting, this is now coming to the Forest Commission with the supplements WS1 and WS3. The squirrel impact surveys in spring years 1, 3 and 5, the exclosures being monitored in years 1, 3 and 5 as well, the cull data annually, and the effort data. How much time are you spending on the ground, and does that relate back to the deer plans and the squirrel plans? There are expectations that the amount of time being spent doing deer culling should be improved across a lot of areas. There are some estates which will probably be already at that level, but this again will have been agreed with the woodland officer and the deer officers at the time of application and through that drafting of the deer plans. In simple terms, we're looking at half a man day per hectare of woodland. And that's sort of a significant ramp up to some areas. And it's based on work we've done in the east of England way back in about 2010 when we were setting up the Deer Woodland Improvement Grant Scheme. There's lots of guidance for all WS1 and WS3 supplements. It's going to be in the template. The links will be in the chat, but it gives you templates for the whole process: the deer management plans, the activity monitoring, the exclosure guides. Both templates and guidance for all aspects of what we require is there. So either speak to ourselves or have a good read of the guidance and then come back to us with questions as we go through. And there's a sort of exactly the same for the squirrel guidance as well as the deer guidance. So in terms of the draft control plans, we are expecting to see the plan not as a War and Peace lecture or discussion as a novel. What we want to see is the actual facts of how you will deliver the deer control and squirrel control over the 5-year period of the scheme. We want to see the time expectations that you're putting on it and the control levels that you think you can undertake to stimulate that woodland improvement or maintenance of good woodland condition if you already have that. It's important that this is led by the forestry consultant and the landowners in conjunction with the deer stalkers. And we've had a few cases over the last 12 months, I have over here in the east, where the deer stalkers have not been consulted or discussed with the deer plan at the time of writing. People have to make sure that they have the time available to be putting into the deer control at the levels expected and to the delivery expectations of the woodland management plan. Unsurprisingly, we've provided cull templates and time effort data templates for you to use. These must be submitted in electronic form to the Forest Commission at the appropriate times. And please do include as much information as possible. There is an expectation that we need to know how much time is being spent and what's being culled. That is an expectation of the grant and supplement, and exactly the same for squirrels. If you're doing collaborative culls or group shoots, if you have one morning out, for instance, for a group shoot and there's 4 of you out, you're out for 4 hours, that is equivalent to 2 man days. With the Habitat Impact and Deer Activity Report, again, there are templates to use, and we expect these templates to be fully written up and submitted. What we don't need to see are the templates and the recording forms that you use as you walk around the woodland. But it's always best to maintain these in a file somewhere in the office so that you can refer back to them if you are inspected by the RPA to demonstrate that you have actually been out and actually looked at what you're doing. We expect to see the holding number, we expect to see the agreement number, and who's been doing the recording in the first part of the form, the areas looked at with the activity level and impact score, and the general trend where you think the woodland is heading. Is it heading in the direction you expected, or are things getting worse? Please insert a map of the survey route. There are boxes for these to be inserted into. Most of us now have various apps on our phones that will follow us wherever we're walking. That can be translated into a map and then cut and pasted into this survey form. I think one of the most important things that we're looking for are the photographs within these. Pictures tell 1,000 words, and really it's the changing structure and what we're looking at within the pictures that will help us with you make sure that you're getting the best out of the supplements being provided. I know over the years there's been quite a significant amount of discussion about the exclosures that we're able to use. In WD2, if you are not in the WS1 supplement, you still have to use the 4 metre by 4 metre exclosures. If you have come into this WS1 supplements, we are now able to approve the use of Gen guards, Harris panels, or wire mesh. It's a matter of making sure that these are agreed with the woodland officer and the deer officer at the time of application, and these are being used to demonstrate changes. It's amazing how we've all got very used to seeing our woodlands in the state they are, with high deer pressure in some areas and a lack of understory. What is this woodland able to provide to us? And the exclosures, hopefully over a number of years, will start to show what potential these woodland areas have and how the control levels and the woodland management work taking place are actually improving that woodland structure. As you can imagine, there are also forms to fill in for the exclosures with our wood name, code each exclosure you put in, and note the change from inside to out and the general change in trend of improvement or stabilization of impact levels. We must have the photographs, the exclosures and the controls at the start and annually. That gives us a chance to actually look at these things and understand what's actually happening on the ground and tracks that change over time. There's also the Squirrel reporting activity forms. This is based on the National Forest's templates for undertaking squirrel impact damage and activity. Again, it's a very straightforward, simple survey walkthrough of woodland areas, and this is a recording form for that. It's important that we do these at the right time of year, and that sort of period of back end of the winter and spring are the times we're starting to expect people to start to look at the impacts that squirrels are having currently. In the first year, it's always best to include a column that talks about the historic damage, but it's current impact levels that we are particularly interested in. All the guidance Armin's putting into the chat for you, the links. There's obviously the forest research templates on best practice, management as grey squirrels. We've got the LANTRA approved grey squirrel management training, and then operations note number 60 for the squirrel control. Deer supplements are under operations note 59, and the Deer Initiative best practice is still available for people to look at to ensure best practice being followed. In terms of the future support, we are continuing to offer the one-to-one site meetings with the deer and woodland officers throughout the year. We can help and support you at any point with our one-to-one meetings. We're having face-to-face meetings on the deer squirrel and impact monitoring sessions. We've got a number of those coming up over the next 2 to 3 months, and they are open to anyone that wants to come along, and as always they are free from our side of things. And then there's national and regional best practice events, some of which we run in conjunction with our partner organisations, and others we'll run independently. The next one that Alistair Boston is organising is Managing Deer Across the English Landscape, and that's based over at Worcester. And like I say, we're all running face-to-face seminars over the next 2 to 3 months on the deer squirrel impact activity surveying techniques for those people who perhaps have missed out on them in the past or want a refresher. So thank you for your attendance this afternoon. I hope, and I have noted that Alistair, that Jamie and Armin have been keeping up with some of the questions in the chat. I'd like to hand over to Alistair now. I'll stop sharing my screen and we can move into the question and answer session. And we've got about 30 minutes of that.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. I've got the first question is from Norbert Kavakis. I apologise if I spelt that wrong or said it wrong. Please could you clarify the rules regarding WS1 and formal woodland creation sites, WGS and FWP schemes that are eligible for WD2 with a question mark? I've had a case excluded as it's not eligible for WS1. All I was told that the areas are not eligible on the account that there is a 20-year-old deer fence present. The guidance published to date doesn't contain anything about this exclusion. which one of my esteemed colleagues would like to take that?
I'll have a go, because there have been a number of cases where a number of not quite the same but similar cases.
Thank you, Jamie.
So to start with the simplest cases first, if an application is being made in the current year at the same time as the WS1 application is being made, if there's an application for fencing on any of the compartments, then it makes complete sense that we cannot pay the WS1 supplement on those newly fenced areas. Similarly, if there are areas such as historic deer parks and so on, which are still considered to be deer parks, then we can't pay WS1 on those such areas, simply because it is likely that the density of deer in those areas will be higher than would be compatible with the kind of environmental impacts that we're trying to prevent. Where there are old fences paid under old schemes, if those fences are still non-porous to deer, still good, then it's really a matter of a discussion with the woodland officer as to whether it is reasonable that the WS1 supplement for culling deer is paid within those fenced areas. So somewhere in that mix is the answer to your question. Basically, it would involve the woodland officer, and then they would refer to the deer officer.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Another question here. Could you clarify, confirm if this is the last year to apply for countryside stewardship, or has the scheme been extended?
David Jam?
Yeah, so there is a likelihood, not a guarantee, that countryside stewardship or some iteration of countryside stewardship will form part of the new environmental land management scheme, but that's not confirmed. And if it does, then it's highly likely that the supplements will go with it. So yeah, so not a definite answer, but there is a likelihood.
We are already looking at how we might even improve the supplements if that is the case.
Thank you, gents. Another question here. Is WS1 option possible on compartments which are already deer fenced? Obviously, deer fencing is not always secure over a long term, and that's by Mel from Rigmaiden Estate up here in Cumbria.
Yeah, I'll sort of reiterate what I said earlier, but in addition to that, if the fencing was done, for instance, under WD2, in other words, public money was accepted to put that fence up, there is already an obligation under WD2 to keep that deer fence intact and deer proof. If that hasn't been the case, then there's a fail under the WD2 requirements. And certainly if the fence is now very porous to deer, it's a discussion to be had with the woodland officer, but certainly you would not be able to resurrect the fence and have WS1.
Thank you very much. Another question here from Ed Wilkinson. Re-exclosures, why just 4 meters by 4 meters?
Okay, David did cover that in his talk, actually. For WD2, if you're in WD2 only, then historically the requirement was for a 4x4 deer fenced exclosure. That is immutable, fixed in stone. However, when we managed to get the supplements, we're now able to say that an exclosure can be of a slightly different design. There are 3 different basic designs. Again, that's the trick, is to discuss that with your woodland officer and deer officer, and then it will come out of the wash for new schemes.
Okay, thank you. Question here from Katie Stevens. Excuse me. Are deer exclosures a requirement for deer and WS1 supplement?
Sorry, when you apply, that will be a discussion that's had with your woodland officer. By and large, we would want exclosures to be included in WS1 supplement, yes.
Thank you. Let's give somebody else a chance to answer a question here. Let's give Jamie a rest. This is from Daniel Small. Please, could you confirm if the squirrel supplement is only eligible on woodlands that is susceptible to squirrel damage, i.e. 10 to 40-year-old broadleaf, or can it be on any woodland with grey squirrels present?
You directing at me, Alistair?
Yes, I am, Mr. Houghton, or Rebecca.
Or Rebecca?
I can answer that.
Go, Rebecca.
It's eligible on any land that has been identified as at risk through your woodland management plan. So if you've highlighted the risk as part of your woodland management plan, it should be available to you, whatever type of woodland you have.
Right, thank you, Rebecca. Next question. Can deer exclosures, plots, be sited within both mature woodland and areas of young restock? Is there a preference? Armand, do you want to take that?
Sorry, Alistair, just ask that again. I was in the middle of reading some questions there.
I thought it right. Are you ready? Can deer exclosure plots be sited within both mature woodland and areas of young restock? Is there a preference?
There's no preference. We would look at your parcel that is in WD2 and try and get a representation of all different forest structures within that parcel. So, for instance, if you have restocks, if you have thickets, if you have pre-thickets, pole stage timber, we would try and get an exclosure plot into each different forest structure. If you only had one forest structure, then probably your exclosure plots wouldn't have to be as many because there is only one type of forestry on your land parcel.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Next question. This is from Gary Primrose. I'm in the middle of a CS higher tier contract with WD2. Do I have to wait until my 5-year contract expires before I can apply for WS1 and WS3? I'm afraid to say, Gary, you do. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news there. What else have we got here now? If deer, this is from Graham Garrett, if deer and grey squirrels are cited as a threat in the woodland management plan, what would the subsequent WD2 requirement be if WS1 and WS3 was not applied for? Would you like to take that, David Hoots?
Yep, can do. Afternoon, Graham. Yes, so it's always up to the applicants what they apply for, but we also need to be mindful that we need to be delivering our WD2 objectives and our woodland management plan objective. If you do not want the supplement and do not want the extra money, but can deliver your current levels of deer management that protect those investments, that's absolutely fine. But we have to remember that the WD2 is woodland improvement. And over the years, we've seen declining woodland condition in some areas. Some areas it's been quite good. It's a matter of making sure that your objectives and your management levels are at the level to deliver what you're trying to achieve. So you wouldn't be discriminated against if you didn't apply for WS1 or WS3. It would just have to make sure that the schemes were meeting what they were setting out to achieve.
Thank you very much, David. Further question here from Norbert again. I'll reference this to either Rebecca or David. Jam, will you update the guidance based on today's Q&A? You're on silent, David.
Yeah, certainly if there's any points that need updating. Yep. So
okay.
The guidance is constantly open for review, but there's currently an annual cycle of review.
Thank you very much. Further question here from Hugh Lloyd again. Can the new squirrel trap capital items be applied for as a standalone application, much like the deer high seats can be?
That's Rebecca, I think.
Rebecca?
It's a good question to which I don't know the answer. I need someone who's does the grant scheme.
Okay, what we'll do, we'll get that answered for you to later date, Hugh, and we'll go back to our grants and licensing side and come back with an update there for you. and we'll put it in the chat box answer. Is that all right, everybody? Next question. Can habitat impact assessments be carried out by anyone, e.g. landowner, or does it need to be someone with specific training?
I think I've already answered that one, Alistair.
Okay.
I'll say it again. No habitat impact assessments can be carried out by anyone, but it would be better if you had some form of training. Each deer officer in their own region will be providing face-to-face training on how to carry out habitat impact assessments, and there is also guidance in Ops Note 59 on gov.uk with templates and guidance on how to carry out habitat impact assessments. And if in any doubt, contact either your woodland officer or your local deer officer.
And the same applies to squirrels, except that we're unable to offer the training, but we will point you at where training might be available for control methods and so on. But we will, part of our events will include a little bit about squirrels. But nonetheless, the training is there. It's advisable to take it up. There is a squirrel impact assessment methodology as well, which again is on Ops Note 60 for you to have a look at.
Okay, question here from Katie Stevens. This will be probably to Rebecca. What are the grants available for the new squirrel capital items?
So the grants are available are for traps, as Armand published this earlier further up the chat. So if you scroll up, there's any of the capital items you might need to do to undertake control work. We're not paying for firearms, but traps, and there's another question about what traps, and it's any licensed trap, so any legal trap can be funded, but what's most appropriate for your site should be discussed with the woodland officer and the deer officers here, who will discuss what's the most appropriate regime for your land and what you're trying to achieve.
That's particularly relevant with red squirrels and pine martens.
Yeah, thank you very much. Question here from Andrew Bromwin. Bearing in mind how hard it can be to get the deer and squirrel populations reduced to sustainable levels, what is the risk of grant money being reclaimed at the end of the period if there's still evidence of damage? This is especially true for squirrels. David Jam, do you want to answer that?
Yeah. Good afternoon, Andrew. Yeah, I mean, I totally understand where you're coming from. That the expectation within the supplements is that landowners will put in additional effort. The payment is really for increasing effort or supporting levels of effort where it's deemed that good management practices are taking place. We haven't set this up to penalise landowners if they're making an effort, and if they're providing us with evidence which demonstrates that they are trying, and they're not just doing what they were doing before. This isn't free money. The supplements were intended to increase effort and get us into a better place than we currently are. We know that WD2 wasn't a very effective tool for increasing deer and squirrel management effort. Whether that answers your question, I don't know. I'm quite happy to take that one offline, Andrew.
If I could just add to it, what David says is correct. So it's the reason why when you look at the WS1 and 3 requirements, most of what we're asking for is evidence, and a lot of it is about evidence of effort put in. And don't forget that you have your deer squirrel folk available as the thing progresses. And if it does look as though things aren't going in quite the desired direction, then there's an awful lot of expertise available to try and steer it in a better direction.
Thank you very much. A question here from Sam Alston. It feels this is a question, but also a bit of a statement. It feels as if the complete package is almost putting small woodland area landowners off from applying. Yet these are the very people we need to be supporting as their main focus is farming rather than woodland. And yet I expect their own vast majority of the country's woodlands. Do we need a better funded and easier simplified package that is better facilitated for woodland owners under, say, 20 hectares? I'll give that one to you, Rebecca.
That's okay. Yeah. So absolutely acknowledge that there is a difference in the kind of overhead compared to area managed within the small woodlands. And for that reason, there's within stewardship, there's a minimum payment that is applicable to small woodland owners. I'm not sure of all the details. This isn't my area of expertise, but there's a recognition of that issue around, there's a greater level of admin burden on a smaller woodland owner, relatively speaking, and there's a minimum payment that should kind of address some of that additional effort that's needed to get these smaller woodlands through the schemes. So it pays for more of that time to do it. That's a bigger issue, and I would suggest that's better suited to a discussion within applicants focus group if you have any links to that, Sam, and that can be explored in more detail there. That's a very partial answer.
Thank you very much. A question here from, I've just lost my Bob C. What types of squirrel traps are eligible? Would GN18 traps be eligible, for example? Also, is there a minimum stroke maximum pound eligibility?
So, as we said before, all legal traps are potentially eligible within this. There isn't a cost cap at them, as I understand it, but what the suitability of that trap for your site would be discussed with woodland owner and with advice from the dear liaison officers on the call, and that would be for subject to local agreement. But yes, it's technically eligible. So if it's suitable, it might be possible to pay for it.
Okay, thank you. Question here from Phil. When carrying out squirrel impact surveys, is it relevant to include information about damage to other species, i.e. nesting birds or just trees? Jamie, do you want to take that?
It would be relevant, and it's possible to make comments whilst the survey is going ahead, but in terms of the information we require under WS3, it's pretty much limited to deer damage, squirrel damage to trees. However, it's one of the requirements of the scheme to keep the basic survey paperwork for use in the future or during the scheme. It must be available, and it's definitely worth keeping a record if such things are being spotted. Yes, but it won't affect the score because that is based on tree damage.
Okay, question here from Angus Wells. Given the need for more deer control across the landscape, will the eligibility be reviewed to enable the WS1 and WD3 to be applied for woodlands not eligible for WD2? Only half of the holdings was eligible for WD2, as all had been previously managed, so could only come under more targeted willow tip prescriptions.
If I might,
go on, Jamie.
It's likely to be perhaps better than that, in that in future schemes discussions are being had about whether it's possible to extend the support onto non-woodland areas as well. So that would capture the wider landscape. The WD2 as it is at the moment, of course, if there's no improvement to be had, it's a woodland improvement scheme. So if there's no improvement to be had, then it's not eligible. But that's how we are at the moment. But in future, it's quite likely that there will be a wider consideration of eligibility.
Thank you. Question from Kate Harvey. Can you WD2? Oh, it's just gone because another question's come in. Sorry. Can WD2 agreements approved December last year with the new SW1 and SW3 apply for the new FY3 Squirrel capital items?
So, hold on.
So can new WT agreements approved December last year with the new SW1 and SW3 apply for the new FY3 Squirrel capital items? Rebecca?
Again, that's scheme eligibility rules. I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's another one. That's the second one we need to come back
find
with.
an answer to that.
Okay. Someone's agreeing with Sam here, and Anna Kane, with regards looking at small woodlands, helping to try and target small woodlands. David Jam said, have I missed a question earlier up, David?
Yeah, Matt Brockle has some question about exclosure specs.
Armand's answered that in the chat box.
Okay.
The only other one is from Matt. Presumably the new squirrel trap capital item requires specific compliant grey squirrel traps only. Are these detailed in the guidance?
No, because it's a very long list. But any legally compliant licensed trap may be used. I will find the link to where they are all listed somewhere, and I will find the link for you.
Okay. Another question here from Will Swift. Is there a minimum amount of impact assessments that should be undertaken across the course of a year? Could you also please confirm if these are submitted to the FC at the end of each year or in the springtime? Armand, do you want to take that? You're on silent, Armand. Armand, you're on silent.
There's always one. There's no minimum amount of impact assessments as far as I'm aware. Again, it comes down to a bit of common sense of looking at deer densities and impact that your deer are having on your woodland. Have discussion with your woodland officer and your deer officer as to how many habitat impact assessments should be required. They'll be able to give you some advice, and we are looking for the data to come in springtime. They should be carried out in springtime, and we're looking for that data to come in end of April, May time.
As soon as possible after the impact assessments have taken place, but absolutely by the year end.
Okay, another question here. Good afternoon, Ed Brown. Sorry, he's been at another meeting. Oh, just another question's come in again, so it just takes it. Can I get the deer and squirrel management funding for my existing HLS? David Hooton?
Nope. Sorry, it's a very simple, straightforward answer. Don't need to go into any details, but no, it's not eligible for any existing scheme, so it's only for current rounds of application.
Okay, further question here from Max Battison. I would also like to know the answer to Kate Harvey's question regarding whether applications that were due to start in January 2023 are able to apply for FY3 capital items. So I think that's one we need to go back and check with grants and licensing. Is that?
Yep.
Do you agree?
Yep.
Okay. Just scrolling through the questions. Right, Sam Alston, troublesome Sam. Not having done a woodland management plan for several years, is there still a payment for this? Mr. Jam?
Not only the payment for WD2, and I think correct me if I'm wrong. I think any payment for producing a management plan's within that, isn't it?
If you're talking about a woodland management plan, yes, there is funding for woodland management plans that's available under a supplement application. But if you're talking about management plans within the supplements, then yes, David's right.
Right, got a long question come statement here. I don't know whether I've done this one. I've been reading that many of them from Anna Kane. I agree with Sam that small woodland owners who have farming as a main focus find the requirements and lack of support, at least in the north, off-putting. Over the last 12 months, FC support has withered in our region. What advice is given is remote, overwhelming, and tailored more towards fosters and large-scale managers. And help to produce draft plans aimed at beginners will be helpful to encourage people to apply for these supplements in the first place. So basically, can we do something more for the people who are only doing woodland management as a secondary, whereas farming's come first? Is there any moves afoot for anything like that?
I think it depends on whether we're talking about woodland management plans here, in which case that's not the deer, squirrel, pigeon. If it's to do with the deer and squirrel management plans, then you get as much support as you need. Just contact the deer officers and we'll give you some answers, but specifically for the deer and squirrel management plans.
Okay.
Plus
the question here
plus
from
there is chapter and verse guidance on completing every aspect of the squirrel and deer plans online.
Yeah. However, keep an eye out for the later versions. They'll be republished very shortly. Certainly this month.
I've just seen
I think on that one
already.
Sorry, Alistair. I mean, on the draft deer plans, don't get bogged down with them, please. If you're sort of thinking about how much information you need, you've probably got enough already, but do speak to us so that we can sort of advise you and talk about your specifics, please, because I mean, it's not complicated, but if you need help, please do just give us a quick call.
Okay. Peter Topham was asking about how do we calculate the deer and squirrel time management side, and he was, there we go. Following on from Mike Denby's question about the differing effort for deer and squirrels, did you say that the estimated 0.5 person days per hectare was for both deer and squirrels? Mr. Hooton?
No, so the squirrel payment, sorry, I'll start with the deer payment. So the deer payment was based on research from East of England, and it was calculated at about that half man day per hectare across a year and across a number of years. That gave a positive result in reducing deer activity and improvement in woodland structure in SSI woodlands. That was based on a roe and muntjac population. In terms of the amount of time and effort required for squirrel control, we're leaving that very much more up to the landowners and agents to decide how much is relevant to their particular woodlands and their situations and their habitat. It's not quite as clear cut how much time and effort you'll need, and actually with both species, it's how much influx you get once you've removed them as well, and you sort of need to work that one out as well. Think about that landscape density, that landscape influx that you generate. So I can't give you an answer for how much squirrel time you need, but for the deer, it is around about that half man day per hectare.
Although that may vary very widely across different situations. So, you know, within your deer management plan, there are various sort of pieces of information which will help lead you to a sensible figure. And then that's always for discussion. You know, we can always work that through with you and come up with something that looks realistic. That's really what we're looking at.
Somebody asked earlier on, David, if the presentation will be shared for people after this meeting.
The recording will be shared, yes.
Okay, thank you. Question here from Charlotte Vincent. I agree with the last point. There's little support to start the process. Farmers need to get into the schemes before they get the help, which means they won't go into the schemes. Had this morning. So what else is there?
Can I just come back on that one, please, Alistair?
Certainly, David.
In terms of the support you can get from us for the deer and squirrel control plans and management plans and any other advice you need on the sort of mammal side, we are always here. It doesn't have to be related to a countryside stewardship higher tier scheme to gain our support and involvement. So from Mammal side, speak to us at any point. And again, the woodland officers are always available to talk about woodland management across the areas. So I mean, do try and use the facilities that we've got and the offer of help and support.
And for the schemes, particularly for the supplements, there is extensive advice on gov.uk. The guidance is all there.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what both David and Jamie said. We're here to help, ladies and gents. So, you know, email us or pick up the phone, because we'll offer the support, all the support we can. Right, further question.
We want you in the schemes. We want you doing the right thing. And if you need help, ask
us. Question here from Hugh Lloyd. I asked the following question/statement at a similar FC event last year. I wonder if there's been any progress. Question is, could the WMP grant be increased if a deer management plan and or a squirrel management plan is included? Rebecca.
That's what the supplement's for, to fund that.
Thank you.
So.
I do believe I'm on top of the questions there, but somebody's going to throw a curveball. Right. Also, I've got one here from Michael Jones, postgraduate student. In my area, we have a very good red squirrel populations and occasional greys. There is minimal damage. However, these are precisely the areas where intensive effort is required to control greys, but with minimal recordable results. In this sense, a body count or reduction of damage. Would this be recognised by anyone auditing the scheme?
Yes, because the requirements are to do the tree damage survey, and your woodland officer, in liaison with the deer officer, mammal officer, we should call you really, shouldn't we? They'll give a good advice about what regime you need to put in place. And so long as you can demonstrate that you've put that regime in place and you've got records that show you've done so many trapping days or whatever it is that's been agreed, that's what the RPA will be looking for. They'll be auditing what you've agreed in your agreement to do. And the impact assessment is one method of demonstrating that. So we appreciate that that's not the perfect method of demonstrating impact in red squirrel areas, and we're looking at how we can introduce something that's more tailored to that. But the standard surveys that we've looked at kind of cover a much bigger area than would be reasonable or give sensible results on perhaps a small land holding or something that somebody has individual control over. So I'm talking to Mike Denbury and others at RSST about what might be appropriate to bring in those red squirrel only areas. But at the moment, this is the requirement.
And I did not. Sorry, David. I did notice a question about to whom the records that we're asking for within the supplements will be sent, and they will come to us. They don't go to the RPA, but the records and the evidence that supports them, the record sheets and so on, must be held for the grant period in case the RPA wants to do a check. But basically, everything comes to us, and we kind of know what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I was going to say, when you send it to us, I mean, I guess there'll be an email address to send it to, sent out shortly, and that information will be with the agreement that you have either signed or are about to sign, and the information will be sent to you about recording periods and where it's to be sent. In terms of RPA inspections, if there is an issue found with an RPA inspection in the forestry woodland aspects, those questions from the RPA will come back to the Forestry Commission ourselves, and we can become involved in that discussion about any potential issues the RPA may have found or they do not understand. So we can help clarify that and clear any issues up.
Thank you very much, David. I believe we've got 3 minutes left, and one further question just coming now, again from Hugh Lloyd. Leading on to the answer to my previous question, I thought the supplements are for monitoring and control, not producing a plan. You have to produce a plan to submit with the application before the grant is offered, much like a WMP. Mr. Hooton?
Yeah, that's more my understanding. The woodland management plan doesn't include a section for specific deer management planning or squirrel control planning. The supplement is for the time elements being put in on the ground, because we want action. So currently, yes, Hugh, you're right. So we talked about this, didn't we, at site, and it's potentially one of the slight shortfalls at the moment, but we've made it as simple and straightforward as possible. Admittedly, there's going to be time involved from you guys to put those plans together, but someone at some stage may well bring the thing together. But at the moment, the supplement really is for that action on the ground. But it's always up to the owner how they spend their money, and it might be that they want to put some of that money into the deer plan or squirrel control plan and less to the actual effort on the ground. We just want to see support across the sector.
But David, just reiterating what you said earlier, when we talk about a deer management plan for these supplements, we basically want a method statement of you telling us what the situation is now, what you intend to do about it, and how you intend to do it. We don't want war and peace. And I think some people have, some of the early applications have been very, very long-winded and wordy about, every aspect of deer and the history of deer on the estate, etc., etc. What we want to know is what you've got and what you're going to do about it, and how you're going to do it, and what kind of resource you're going to use. That's kind of it. But if in doubt, speak to your deer officer or your woodland officer and get some advice, before commissioning a deer expert to write you a plan at great cost. That's not what we want.
Okay, I'm going to do two more, then I'm going to hand to David to close the meeting. Have the FC considered the deer officers visiting in years 1 and 3 of the agreement, rather than relying on the evidence gathering and submitting photographs? I would expect this will be well received and lead to better outcomes.
I've just answered that. Alistair,
yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Jamie. It's right, I'm going to take one more. Yes, this is not really. It's a lady by the name of Mary Reed, and she said she's got a very new woodland officer who doesn't know a lot about the schemes, and she would like to know more. Mary, I would ask you to contact one of us, or whoever your deer officer is in your area, and they'll be able to update you on the squirrels and deer side of the supplements. I've no further questions to ask. I believe we're almost done to time now. That's enough from me. I'll hand you back to David Hooton. Thank you very much, folks.
Excellent. Thank you very much for what I think has been a really good Q&A session. Hopefully you have all sort of got a bit more knowledge about where we are with the supplements, where we're going over the next year or so with them. I want to spend as much time on the ground, and I know the other deer officers do as well, visiting you guys out there, supporting you with what you're doing, helping you identify any pitfalls, shortfalls of the schemes, and making sure that what we get for the future is as bulletproof and as robust as what we can to give you guys the opportunity to deliver higher levels of woodland management and protection. So from the team here, thank you very much for coming along and listening to us. To my team, or to the team, not just my team, are they? To our team, to our colleagues, thank you for your input and time. Great afternoon, and remember, any questions, fire them to us and we'll carry on answering them, and we're here to support you. Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.